Hi, everyone. This is Jen Grisanti of Jen Grisanti Consultancy. In this video, I want to tell you about my newest angle of looking at story, and this is called story therapy. So what I do is every year I look for what are the top series and films where story is being told at a very high level, where we are connecting and we are feeling, and we may be crying and we may be cheering on, and we may just love the story. And what I want to do with this is, how are these writers telling these stories where we are feeling these types of emotions? And this brought me to story therapy. What is story therapy? Story therapy reveals what the story is about from the inside. So every year, I do this with story, and last year I did finding story. So my concept and angle last year had to do with, how do you find story in shows that are working, and where is story working, and how do we develop tools and strategies so that more stories can work at a high level. With story therapy, expanding upon that concept, I identified 5 shows and 1 film that really hit the mark with how they're going into story. So I extracted tools and breakdowns from these stories to pass on to you. And I put together a 3 free training video that will be available starting December 29th. And if you are interested in signing up for this, you can follow the link below this video. To give you a small glimpse of where do you start? How do you think about? So the dilemma I recognize that so many screenwriters face is, how do you reveal backstory in the current story? How do you tell story where the audience is going to know this is your message and this is what your concept is about? This is everything we want to know. We want to feel your intention in your story. So when you think about the intention of story, think about the idea of clearing and cleansing the negative narrative, doing the emotional work to seek truth and make the dream happen. So story transforms, and this is what you want to do with your story. And where I tell writers to start when you're thinking about what are your strategies for your backstory, start with 3 things. Start with, the first thing you want to think about is the childhood wound or the flaw. So if you're starting with the childhood wound, then you want to think about, how does the childhood wound lead to the flaw? If you are starting with the flaw, then you want to think, what would happen in the childhood wound that would lead to this type of behavior? And with the childhood wound, you can identify a specific event, which some of the shows I cover do this, or you can identify an emotional experience, like emotional abandonment of a parent is a big one that so many shows include, but some shows go into a specific event, while other shows just explore the idea of the emotional abandonment in a broader way. Then the second thing you want to think about is, what is your trigger event that happens before we enter the story? So this is something that I am noticing that so many shows are utilizing for their engine of story. Is they're having a specific trigger event that happens before we enter the story, and then that is part of the engine for the story. You look at shows like that I'm going over, you can look at a show like Flight Attendant and Mayor of Easttown that do this, and we will go into this. Then the third thing you want to think about is, how does the series trigger and dilemma split the trigger, the wound from the trigger event open, as well as the childhood wound? And how does the flaw that we're seeing get in the way of the dream in the current story? So you're essentially linking these parts of your story together with a specific strategy. So this gives you a glimpse of, how do you start to tell story in a way that will transform your audience? I want to thank you so much for joining me.